Something is wrong the moment the camera clicks on, as if the forest itself has been holding its breath. The air trembles with a low hum, too steady to be wind, too cold to be harmless. The lens jitters, shaken by a pair of unseen hands, and for a heartbeat we glimpse the outline of trees, leaning in the wrong direction, bending toward the sound rather than away from it. Shadows twitch against the bark, slipping between roots like silent animals with human patience. A faint whistle rises, distant yet deliberate, as if someone deep in the woods is calling out a warning no one was meant to hear. The recording wavers, catching a flash of something tall behind the nearest trunk, still as carved stone. The hum stops. The forest quiets, and then, just before the footage cuts, a shape flares at the far edge of the frame, watching, waiting, almost close enough to touch. The town of North Grove never spoke plainly about the forest. They used softened phrases, half-truths, and uneasy glances exchanged over diner counters. Stories drifted like dust. Hunters who heard footsteps behind them though no one followed. Tents unzipped from the outside while campers slept. Fires that dimmed whenever someone whispered a name lost to the woods. What unsettled everyone most was the silence afterward. A silence too thick, too careful. It felt as if the woods listened, storing each spoken word for later. As the years passed, legends grew roots, of a watcher who learned voices, of paths that folded into themselves, and of warnings carved into bark long before the town was built. No one admitted believing the stories, yet no one dared wander too far alone. The first vanishings came quietly, almost politely. A pair of hunters failed to return one autumn morning, and people assumed they had simply pushed too deep into the timberline. But search parties returned pale-faced, claiming the forest felt wrong, as though their footsteps were being copied a beat too late. Radios crackled with static whenever someone tried to call out a name, and more than one volunteer swore they saw a figure standing still between the pines, only to find empty air when they approached. The disappearances resumed the next year, and the year after that, each one marked by the same hollow stillness. Something was watching. Something was waiting. And it was learning how to hide. Elias Ward noticed the pattern long before he admitted it aloud. The missing hunters never vanished at random. They disappeared along the same narrow corridor of trees, a strip of land where compasses stuttered and animals refused to follow. He marked each spot on his map, and a shape began to emerge, curved, looping back, almost intentional. He tried convincing himself it was coincidence, a trick of fear twisting harmless terrain into something darker. But the deeper he looked, the clearer the design became. Someone, or something, was choosing where the hunters would fall silent. The latest footage arrived in a battered evidence box, the camcorder still slick with dried mud. Lena Pike stood silent as investigators threaded the tape through the viewer. Her breath held as though the machine itself might exhale her brother's final moments. When the screen flickered on, the room chilled. Owen's voice cracked through static, followed by the low hum again. Steady, patient, close. A sharp movement crossed the frame, too tall to be a man, too smooth to belong to anything that walked on two legs. The camera lurched, and then the image froze on a single terrible truth. Owen had not been alone in those woods. The earliest disappearance was barely more than a rumor, whispered through brittle newspaper clippings and fading family stories. A lone hunter entered the woods in late autumn, when frost clung to the branches and the wind carried a distant ringing like metal against stone. He was experienced, confident, and familiar with every ridge of North Grove, yet something in those trees unsettled him enough to leave a final note behind. A warning scribbled so fast the ink tore the paper. Searchers claimed they found his footprints circling the same patch of ground again and again, as if he had been walking in place while the world shifted around him. Long before the town feared the forest, one man already sensed it changing. already felt the presence that waited in the leaves, already heard the call no one else believed existed. North Grove Woods did not follow the rules of ordinary land. Maps drawn by surveyors failed to agree with one another. Paths that once led downhill now seemed to climb upward, and hunters often reported walking for hours only to find themselves back at their starting point. Marina Flores studied the shifts, believing at first that natural magnetic faults or geological anomalies were to blame. But the deeper she ventured, the more the forest betrayed something deliberate in its layout, as though the ground itself chose where strangers were allowed to walk. Trees identical in shape appeared miles apart, roots braided into patterns too precise to be accidents. It was as if the forest had learned to rearrange itself, bending its own corridors into traps designed for those who dared to enter. The old map discovered in the ranger archives should not have existed. The paper was older than the town itself, edges torn by time and moisture, yet the markings were new, bright red symbols drawn with a material that shimmered faintly in low light. No one claimed responsibility for updating it, and the record logs listed no recent entries. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his chest as he traced the winding path of the symbols. They followed the same looping pattern he had observed in the disappearances. Someone had marked the forest long before he understood its rules, someone who seemed to know exactly where people would vanish. The map felt less like a record and more like a warning passed down from an unseen watcher, a guide to the places where the trees were no longer just trees. Among the scattered belongings of a vanished hunting party, investigators recovered a leather-bound journal stained with rain and soil. Caleb Hunt remembered the man who wrote it, a careful, meticulous hunter who never exaggerated anything. Yet the entries grew frantic over time, the handwriting erratic as he described someone following the group, someone who moved with unnatural quiet, someone whose footsteps matched theirs but never caught up. He wrote of feeling eyes on him from the treetops, of hearing laughter that did not belong to any living creature. The final page ended mid-sentence. The pen stroke dragged sharply across the paper as though yanked from his hand. Whatever stalked those hunters did not want its story finished. Physical evidence had always been scarce. Broken branches, abandoned gear, footprints fading into nothing. But the discovery deep within the northern ridge changed everything. During a search, Marina found a set of impressions in the mud, spaced too far apart to belong to any known animal, yet shaped unmistakably like something walking upright. The prints circled a small clearing as if pacing around its edges, studying the ground or waiting for someone to arrive. The soil was freshly disturbed, despite the area being untouched for months. For the first time, investigators knew they were not just chasing shadows or rumors. Something had been there, close enough to leave its mark, close enough to watch them from the trees. Families of the missing hunters spoke with a quiet grief that settled into the room like dust. Their memories carried warmth, but their words were edged with something colder, questions that had never found answers. One widow described hearing her husband's voice outside their home, weeks after he vanished, calling her name in the same gentle tone he always used. Another recalled finding his favorite jacket draped neatly over their porch rail, despite search teams insisting it was lost deep in the forest. Each testimony shared the same unsettling pattern. Belongings returning without explanation, sounds echoing when no footsteps followed, small details that suggested the hunters were not simply gone. They were being echoed. They were being echoed. As the interviews unfolded, it became clear that the forest had not only taken these men, it had learned them. The whistle was faint, almost gentle, yet it carried through decades of recollection like a thread woven into the forest's memory. Elders of North Grove remembered their parents warning them about it. A long, rising note that drifted between the trees whenever someone wandered alone. Hunters joked about it at first, claiming it belonged to an unseen bird or a gust of wind rolling through the ridges. But the tone was too perfect, too deliberate, always repeating the same melody. In recordings collected from across 50 years, the sound never changed. No matter the season, no matter the weather, the whistle followed the same pattern, as if replaying something it had memorized long ago. It was not a call for help or warning. It was an invitation, patient and irresistible. While surveying a remote ridge, Elias discovered carvings unlike anything he had ever seen. Symbols etched deep into the bark of ancient trees long before the town existed. The marks formed patterns that curved like branching rivers, repeating across entire groves with unnerving precision. He traced one with his fingertips and felt the grooves sink deeper than natural weathering could explain, as though carved by hands both patient and powerful. The symbols matched no known language, yet their placement felt intentional, almost instructional. Caleb suggested they resembled territorial signs used by predators, warning intruders to turn back. But the sheer age of the carvings hinted at something older than any hunter, older than the town, older than memory itself. It was as if the forest had been claiming its boundaries long before humans ever stepped inside. Trackers were accustomed to prints fading, shifting, or vanishing into soft ground. But when Caleb examined the trail leading toward the northern grove, he froze. The footprints, clearly human, followed a steady path before stopping mid-stride, the final impression cutting off in clean, sharp edges, as though the walker had been lifted into the air. No signs of dragging, no broken brush, no hint of struggle. The forest floor around the spot looked untouched, blank and patient. Caleb walked in circles, searching for continuation, but the trail ended as abruptly as if someone had erased the rest of the world beyond that step. The woods did not simply hide people. They removed them, plucking them out of the path with an ease that suggested long practice. The forgotten campsite lay buried beneath layers of fallen needles and creeping vines, untouched since the night its occupants vanished. Elias and Marina uncovered remnants slowly. An overturned pot, a torn pack strap, a lantern still filled with fuel. But the most chilling detail was the silence, thick and suffocating, as though the forest had swallowed the last sounds of the hunters' struggle. Branches around the camp bent inward in unnatural angles, forming a warped ring that felt more like a boundary than an accident. Marina noted claw-like marks on one of the logs, deep and curved, not matching any creature known to roam the region. Whatever had happened here was swift, silent, and precise. The forest had not merely witnessed the event, it had shaped it. At first, the wind was just wind. Soft, shallow breaths moving across the canopy. But as the search team spent more time in the northern ridge, something shifted. The gusts grew steady, almost rhythmic, exhaling in long, deliberate pulses that rose and fell like the slow breathing of something enormous hidden beneath the soil. Elias noticed it before the others, freezing mid-step as the branches around him swayed in unison. The air carried a low vibration that hummed through his ribs, subtle enough to dismiss but too constant to ignore. It felt as though the forest had found its voice, and it wasn't whispering anymore. The breathing surrounded them, pulling closer with each rise of the wind, as if the trees themselves inhaled their presence and waited to exhale something back. The first time the recording captured movement in the treetops, Marina replayed the footage again and again, hunting for any logical explanation. The camera panned upward during a routine sweep, catching a quick flicker of something dark crossing between branches, too fast to be a bird, too smooth to be a falling limb. Frame by frame, the shape curved along the canopy with unsettling grace, bending leaves without breaking a single one. As she slowed the footage to a crawl, the forest above seemed alive with hidden motion, as though dozens of unseen forms were weaving through the branches just out of sight. Whatever watched from the treetops was not simply passing by. It was following them, studying them, choosing when to reveal only the faintest glimpse of its presence. The distress call came at dusk, crackling through a half-functioning radio that had been silent for days. A hunter's voice, strained, shaking, pleaded for help, repeating a single phrase between bursts of static. "It's above me." Elias and Caleb froze as the transmission dipped in and out, the man's words breaking into fragments, swallowed by interference. Then came a long pause, followed by a soft scraping sound, like branches dragging across metal. The final moment was a breath, sharp and terrified, before the line went dead. No coordinates, no follow-up signal, nothing but the echo of fear carried through failing circuitry. Something had reached him before anyone else could, something that had learned how to approach without touching the ground at all. When the team returned to the site of an abandoned camp, they expected decay, scattered gear, and signs of weathering. Instead, they found something impossibly new. Vines wrapped tightly around rifles and backpacks, fresh shoots sprouting from cloth that had only been left days earlier. Moss had grown thick along the edges of tents, as though months had passed in a single night. Marina touched one of the vines and felt warmth beneath its surface, a faint, pulsing rhythm that did not match any plant she knew. It was as if the forest had accelerated around the objects, consuming them with unnatural speed. The land wasn't just reclaiming what was left behind, it was erasing the evidence altogether. They found the body at dawn, half buried beneath a thick bed of needles. At first, Elias thought it was one of the recent victims, but the moment they brushed aside the debris, dread rippled through the clearing. The skin was leathery, preserved unnaturally well, and the clothing was decades out of date. No animals had touched it, no rot had taken hold. The forest had kept the corpse intact, hiding it like a secret waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Caleb stepped back as the light shifted, illuminating faint marks along the ribs, deep grooves matching the ancient carvings found on the trees. Whoever this man had been, he died long before the disappearances began, yet the forest had chosen now to return him. A message carved in flesh. The camcorder should have been dead. Its battery had corroded, its circuits clogged with mud, and yet the moment investigators lifted it from the evidence tray, the device flickered on by itself. A faint glow washed across the cracked screen, illuminating dust in the quiet room. For a heartbeat, nothing appeared, just static, drifting like fog across the display. Then a shaky frame burst through darkness, showing the forest floor trembling beneath hurried footsteps. No one had pressed play. No one had touched a button. It was as if the camcorder had been waiting for someone to hold it, waiting to share a piece of the truth on its own terms. The screen brightened, revealing the edge of a shadow stretching far too long for the figure that cast it. As the footage continued, something moved behind the hunters, something too fast for the human eye. Owen's voice carried a nervous edge as he scanned the trees, unaware of the dark shape slipping between trunks behind him, appearing in one frame and gone in the next. The creature glided with silent precision, bending the light around its form like heat shimmer on asphalt. Even slowed to its lowest playback speed, the motion was wrong, too smooth to belong to bone and muscle. Each time the hunters paused, the figure paused with them. Each time they turned, it melted behind the nearest tree. The forest had not only stalked them, it had mirrored their every step, watching with a patience that suggested it knew exactly how this story would end. The next section of the tape forced investigators to pause. A shadow stretched across the ground, long, thin, and splitting into two separate shapes before pulling itself back together. Owen's breathing hitched as he swung the camera toward the distortion, but the lens struggled to focus, as if the thing resisted being seen. The figure's outline fractured, dividing like strands of smoke caught in a crosswind, each part moving with purpose before merging again. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't an illusion. Something in the forest could change shape, breaking itself apart and reforming without sound. The hunters had no way of understanding what they were witnessing, but the camera did its best to capture the impossible, even as the creature slipped closer with each frame. Near the end of the footage, Owen whispered something the investigators would never forget. His voice, once steady, had thinned to a trembling rasp. "It's learning," he murmured, barely audible beneath the static. At first, no one understood what he meant, until the next frames revealed a chilling truth. The creature echoed the hunter's movements with uncanny precision, tilting its head when they did, pausing when they froze, matching rhythm and breath as though studying how to wear their mannerisms like a mask. Branches shifted overhead, bending toward the group in eerie unison. It was not hunting by instinct. It was hunting by understanding, shaping itself around the behaviors of the men it followed. Owen's whisper wasn't panic, it was realization. The final frames were the clearest the camcorder had ever captured. The hunters had stopped running, their breaths ragged and uneven. Owen raised the camera one last time, and for the first time, the creature did not hide. It stood at the far end of the clearing, a towering silhouette outlined by faint beams of moonlight filtering through the trembling canopy. Its limbs were long and unnatural, bending slightly as though adjusting to the shape it had chosen. The face was obscured, but the posture, upright, attentive, suggested intelligence far beyond simple predation. The forest quieted, holding its breath as Owen faced it. Then the image jolted, the screen washed out in white, and the recording ended with a silence deeper than the darkness itself. Whatever stared back at Owen had finally stepped into the open. Experts gathered around the footage with the kind of silence usually reserved for tragedies. They advanced frame by frame, their faces tightening as each new detail came into focus. The creature's movements defied biology, bending at angles no skeleton could support, gliding without disturbing a leaf beneath it. Audio technicians isolated hidden layers in the recording, faint echoes beneath the static that resembled breathing, but not the breathing of a single bee. It sounded multiplied, overlapping, as if the forest itself inhaled in unison with the shape on screen. None of the experts could identify the species or even label the phenomenon. The tape broke every rule they trusted, and as each observation stacked upon the next, one truth settled heavily in the room. The creature was not improvising. It had been doing this for a very long time. When Elias returned to the forest, he noticed signs that felt disturbingly familiar. Trees leaning in identical angles, clearings shaped in near-perfect circles, branches snapped at matching heights as though arranged by deliberate right hands. These were not accidents of nature. They resembled territorial markings, a silent map carved into the land by something that understood boundaries and control. The deeper he walked, the more the forest felt organized, almost architectural, guiding him through paths that narrowed and widened with intention. Animal tracks vanished abruptly at the same points human prints had. Even the stillness carried a rhythm, as though the creature regulated the forest around it like a heartbeat. This was not merely its home. It was its design. Caleb had once dismissed the stories of voices in the forest as panic-fueled imagination, but the new recordings shattered his certainty. When investigators enhanced the audio, they found distinct human tones woven into the distant calls. Voices of the missing hunters, repeating familiar phrases with wrong timing and strange emphasis. The creature wasn't mimicking by accident. It had listened, studied, and practiced until it could sound convincing enough to lure prey deeper into its territory. A chilling realization crept over everyone who heard the samples. The mimicry wasn't hollow. It carried emotion, inflection, even personality. Whatever lived in those woods had learned not just how humans spoke, but how they felt. A breakthrough came when Marina discovered a structure deep in the western basin, a clearing arranged with stones, branches, and skeletal remnants in a spiral pattern older than any documented settlement. The design was intricate, purposeful, with symbols echoing the carvings found on ancient trees. Elias felt a dread he couldn't explain as he stepped into the formation, sensing the weight of many years pressed into the ground beneath him. This was not the work of hunters, nor a campsite left behind. It resembled a ritual site, built with intention, its pattern forming what looked unmistakably like a boundary marker. The creature had not appeared suddenly. Its history was etched into the soil. As the pieces came together, the pattern grew impossible to ignore. Every disappearance lined up with the ancient symbols, the synchronized tree growth, the mimicry, and the unnatural geometry shaping the land. The creature moved, not randomly, but with careful precision, selecting hunters who crossed specific invisible thresholds. Elias mapped the vanishings across decades, and the result mirrored the spiral found in the ritual clearing, its lines curving inward toward a central point deep within the forest. Whatever lived in North Grove was not wandering its territory. It was protecting something sacred, ancient, and hidden. The forest was not just a hunting ground. It was a perimeter, and the creature was its guardian. Caleb had spent years avoiding the truth, burying it beneath silence and distance, but eventually he agreed to speak. His words carried the weight of someone who had seen the impossible and survived only because the forest allowed it. He described the night in broken fragments, the shifting shadows, the voice that called to him with perfect familiarity. The moment he realized it was not his hunting partner speaking, but something wearing the man's voice like a mask. The forest had watched him long before he understood he was being followed. It lured him through winding paths until he reached a clearing so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat echo back at him. There, the creature approached, slow, deliberate, and for reasons he never understood, it let him leave. His survival was not luck. It was a message. Research into the region's oldest records revealed a tragedy buried beneath centuries of soil. Long before the town existed, a small group of settlers vanished under circumstances eerily similar to the modern disappearances. Their journals described strange lights in the woods, trees bending as though listening, and voices calling from unseen places. One entry spoke of a violent struggle between the settlers and the land, a conflict born from desperation and fear. As Elias and Marina pieced together the final fragments, they realized the forest had been wounded once, forced to defend itself. Whatever force resided within those roots had been shaped by that grief, twisted into something protective and vengeful. The creature was not a monster created from nothing. It was the legacy of an old harm that had never healed. As investigators pushed deeper into the forest, the reactions grew increasingly violent. Branches snapped overhead without wind, soil shifted beneath their feet, and distant whistles began overlapping as though multiple voices were speaking at once. Animals fled the region entirely, leaving behind a hollow landscape too quiet to feel natural. Elias felt the presence growing stronger with each step, tightening around them like a warning. The forest had tolerated their search until now, but crossing into its oldest grove stirred something buried beneath centuries of silence. Every sound felt amplified, every movement echoed, as if the forest's attention had narrowed to a single point: the intruders who dared approach its heart. The oldest grove felt untouched by time, its trees rising like pillars of a forgotten cathedral. In the center stood a massive trunk, hollowed yet still alive, its inner walls carved with symbols matching those found across the forest. As Elias stepped forward, a tremor rippled through the ground, and from the shadows the creature emerged, its shape shifting, unstable, as though the forest itself breathed through it. It did not lunge or roar. It simply watched. Its stillness was a demand, not a threat. Elias understood then that the disappearances were not random violence, but enforcement of a boundary meant to protect whatever lay beneath the roots. The creature was guarding a wound older than memory, and he was standing on its rawest point. In the final moments of the investigation, the forest fell into a silence thicker than fog. Elias lowered his map, realizing there was no path that did not cross the creature's territory, no trail that did not echo with the weight of what had been lost. The entity retreated into the roots as dawn broke, its form dissolving into the shifting light. The team left the grove with the understanding that the disappearances were not a puzzle to solve, but a warning never meant to be challenged. As the investigators returned to town, the forest swayed in a slow, deliberate rhythm, its breathing calm again. The footage explained the vanishings, but it also carried a final, chilling truth. The woods were never hostile. They were protecting something. And now they were watching who dared return.